Hello and welcome back to Founding Documents for Today. I'm Jim, and today I wanted to talk about the Electoral College. Should it be abolished? So I bring this up because lately in the news we've seen a lot of important people saying that they think that we should abolish the Electoral College. Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, the most prominent two persons. So first, what is the Electoral College? So the Electoral College is the way we elect our president. We in the Constitution have two particular things that state that the president will be elected by: the Electoral College and the popular vote. We only use the popular vote to determine the votes for the Electoral College. So you can win the popular vote, but not win the presidency. You have to win the Electoral College. The way you do that is you put together the right number of states and the right combination to get yourself to 270. The first candidate who gets 270 electoral votes, they win the presidency. There have been 6 times in our past where presidents have won the popular vote but not become the president. So that tends to ruffle people's feathers because they sort of think, and probably rightfully so, that their vote didn't count. So the Electoral College, the way it works is, take Maryland, for example. Maryland has 10 electoral votes. You get Every state gets 2 votes automatically for each of its senators because every state has 2 senators. The rest of the votes are made up of based on population. So, for example, about every 760,000 persons per state, you get another representative in Congress. So, however many representatives you have in Congress plus your number of senators equals your electoral vote total. So Maryland has 8 representatives and we have 2 senators. We get 10 total votes. Okay. So if you take Texas, which is a very populous state compared to Maryland, you get 40 electoral votes, 2 senators, 38 representatives. So part of the problem, people say, with the way the Electoral College is run is that if you are in Maryland, and let's say we know that Maryland usually goes Democrat, always going to vote for the Democrat candidate. Texas is always going to vote for the Republican candidate, generally speaking. So if you're a Democrat living in Texas, you might say to yourself, and it does happen, that, hey, my vote's not going to count. I'm a Democrat. I know Texas is going to go for the Republican. Why even bother going out? And conversely, so if you're in Maryland and you are a Republican, you're going to say, perhaps, I'm not going to vote because I know the Democrats run the state and the state's just going to vote for the Democrat candidate. So part of the problem is that it may dilute the vote. It may keep people from voting. And we don't want that because in a democracy, everybody has to participate. Everybody's voice has to be heard, or else everybody's needs aren't met, which means that we're not really a democracy. We're not doing the best for everybody. And if everybody doesn't win, we all lose. That's the basic premise of a democracy. You have to participate for it to work. So we want everybody to participate. Another problem with the Electoral College is in today's way of campaigning, money is king. And so if you can campaign in the right states at the right time and say the right thing, you can put together the right combination of 270 votes and not win the popular vote and win the presidency, which has happened. And because of moneyed interests, or what we call lobbyists, factions, and party politics, lots of candidates can manipulate the situation, even though they're not the most worthy person to be president or a senator or a congressman or congressperson. So let's talk about what the founding fathers, in particular one founding father, James Madison, actually thought about the Electoral College. So a little bit of background: in 1787, during the Constitutional Convention, the the men who got together, they argued about how representation should be figured out. And so part of the problem was Southern states didn't have as many white people as Northern states, and they knew it. And they were afraid that if representation was based just on population, that they might lose out. That Northern states might make laws that would ruin Southern economy, especially the one of the possibility of outlawing slavery. So to negate this, the Southern states proposed having two sorts of um, representation: equal and population-based. Now, this was not ideal because people like James Madison, who we consider to be the father of the Constitution, he was very, very versed on Athenian democracy, Roman democracy, and other democracies in history. And he knew that the best way to make sure that criminal activities, that bad things, bad people didn't become the leaders of our country, he knew that the best way to prevent bad things from happening was to have one person, one vote. So everybody gets a direct vote for president was his original idea. However, states, especially South Carolina, Georgia, they refused to join the Union unless there was a guarantee by the northern states that there could be some other type of representation to guarantee that they wouldn't be bullied out of their economic lifestyle. So, reluctantly, it was proposed, the Three-Fifths Compromise was proposed, and then the Electoral College was proposed as a compromise to add on to the Three-Fifths Compromise. So, I'm going to read to you what James Madison originally said during the Constitutional Convention. And if you haven't ever heard of it, there's a book called The Notes on the Constitutional Convention, written by James Madison. He wrote down every word that every representative said the entire time that they were there. I highly recommend you pick it up and read it. Madison writes about himself speaking, so he sounds like he's talking about somebody else, but he's actually talking about himself because he was trying to keep an objective viewpoint. So this is what he said during the Constitutional Convention about an electoral college. Madison said, if it be a fundamental principle of free government that the legislative, executive, and judiciary powers should be separately exercised, it is equally so that they be independently exercised. There is the same and perhaps greater reason why the executive should be independent of the legislature than why the judiciary should. A coalition of the two former, the legislative and the executive, those two would be more immediately and certainly dangerous to public liberty. It is essential, then, that the appointment of the executive should either be drawn from the source or held by some tenure that will give him a free agency with regard to the legislature. This could not be if he was to be appointable from time to time by the legislature. So Madison is directly saying, you can't take the chance on having the executive be voted in just by the legislature or representatives that we voted in, because it's too easy for them to create some sort of collusion. So Madison did not want representation, the representatives in Congress, to have a final say on how the president was elected. So that, combined with the fact that some states would not join the Union if there wasn't some sort of compromise to make sure that they had enough power, political power, Madison reluctantly suggested the Electoral College. So the Electoral College, like I explained, was a compromise, a way to keep the Union together. And it today seems antiquated because we really want our representation, our presidents, to be voted on by us. So that's the big problem we face. And Madison knew it. And so in 1823, he wrote to a friend about the Electoral College and perhaps changing it. Because, here we are almost 50 years after the creation of our country, and Madison sees that it's not necessary to have the Electoral College. We've worked out the kinks. The southern states are not going to leave. We're in a permanent union. And so he thinks we could probably amend it. We could probably change it. And so he writes to a friend about this possibility. And he writes, I agree entirely with you in the thinking that the election of presidential electors by districts is an amendment very proper to be brought forward at this time, with that relating to the eventual choice of president by the House of Representatives. The district mode was mostly, if not exclusively, in view when the Constitution was framed and adopted, and was exchanged for the general ticket and the legislative election as the only expedient for baffling the policy of the particular states which had set the example. A constitutional establishment of that mode will doubtless aid in reconciling the smaller states to the other change which they will regard as a concession on their part. And it may not be without a value in another important respect. The states, when voting for president, by general tickets or by the legislatures, are a string of beads. When they make their elections by districts, some of these differing in sentiments from others, and sympathizing with that of districts in other states, They are so knit together as to break the force of those geographical and other noxious parties, which might render the repulsive too strong for the cohesive tendencies within the political system. So Madison is saying, hey, look, guys, we made this a compromise back in 1787. Now we've established ourselves. We've come a long way. We now know that people are taking advantage of the geography of the country, of the way in which electors are put together or voted into office. So we need to do something to make sure that people don't take advantage of the system any further, that they don't make coalitions that are so strong that they can put together lobbyists and groups that will put somebody who's not qualified into the office of the executive branch. So this is his hope. So in 1824, there is the election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Nobody wins a majority of the electoral votes. The election goes into the House of Representatives. In 1824, the election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson brings the question of the Electoral College to a head. In that election, nobody wins the Electoral College. They don't win, and nobody wins the majority of the electoral votes. So it goes to the House. John Quincy Adams is ultimately elected president. He appoints the Speaker of the House at the time, Henry Clay, as his Secretary of State. Jacksonians, or Jackson supporters, see this as what they would call a corrupt bargain. They figured Clay and Adams made a deal. I'll give you a job if you get your buddies to make me president. There is no historical proof of this, but it does seem a little sketchy on its face. So we don't know we don't know that's what happened. But Jacksonian supporters ran with that idea, and they ran with it because they did not like the idea of an elitist group of persons manipulating the Electoral College for their benefit. Jacksonian supporters were all about the common man. They felt that it should be about majority rules, one person, one vote. And Jackson swore up and down that if it had been one person, one vote, or what we call the popular vote, he would have become president. And he probably is right in that sense. But he's only right in that particular instance, and it doesn't apply to the other 6 instances, the other 5 instances, where presidents were elected without the popular vote. So, yes, it probably is a good idea to have one person, one vote, because there is manipulation of the Electoral College. There has been the manipulation from the very beginning, really. And with today's money, we know that it's an even bigger problem. So, what do we do about that today? Do we amend the Electoral College? Do we pass an amendment, which would be practically impossible in today's political climate, to abolish the Electoral College? Or do we just keep going this way? Do we take the chance that yet another moneyed interest group could manipulate another unqualified candidate into office? Is that the way we want to go? Or do we want to make sure it's really a democracy, one person, one vote, everybody's voices represented and heard? I will put up the resources, the sources that I use to read these letters, to bring you these letters. And I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you for listening.